In a small town like Independence, Missouri, where the sense of community is as strong as the bonds of a decades-long marriage, the last thing anyone expected was a murder that would not only shatter a family but also shake the very pillars of faith and trust. But what happens when the person you'd least suspect turns out to be involved in a crime so heinous, it leaves the entire community asking, why? Today, we delve into the shocking murder of Randy Stone, a former Marine and a pillar of the community, whose life was cut short in the most unimaginable way. Hold on to your seats. This story is a labyrinth of love, betrayal, and unthinkable acts committed by the people you'd least expect. Randy Stone wasn't just any man. He was a symbol of integrity and community spirit in Independence, Missouri. A former Marine, Randy had the kind of discipline and values that made him a role model. He and his wife, Teresa, were married for 19 years, and together they ran a veterans insurance business. But Randy's influence extended far beyond his home and office. He was the kind of person who would help his neighbors shovel snow, volunteer at community events, and offer a listening ear to anyone in need. In a town where everyone knows everyone, Randy was universally loved. So, when the news broke that he was found shot to death in his own office, the community was left in a state of disbelief and sorrow. Who could possibly want to harm such a man? And why? As we peel back the layers of this tragic story, you'll find that even pillars can crumble, and sometimes they're brought down by the very people who should have been holding them up. It was a call that would send shockwaves through the community of Independence, Missouri. Teresa Stone, wife of Randy Stone, dialed 911 in a state of apparent distress. She reported finding her husband, Randy, shot to death in his office. But something was off. How did Teresa know her husband had been shot without touching the body? This discrepancy would become a focal point in the investigation that followed. The authorities were puzzled. Teresa's call was filled with emotion, yet her words seemed almost rehearsed. Could it be that she had prepared for this moment? The question loomed large as investigators delved deeper into the case. As they sifted through the evidence, a love letter surfaced from the workplace's trash. The letter contained cryptic messages like, "Happy birthday, love. I am not in control of things yet, but when we are fully together, your birthday will always be exciting." Who was this letter for, and what did it mean? When Teresa was brought in for questioning, her alibi was almost too perfect, down to the smallest detail. Confronted with the love letter, she feigned ignorance. However, a surveillance camera caught her muttering, "Oh great, I forgot about that," when she thought she was alone. Could Teresa really have forgotten such a crucial piece of evidence? Or was this all part of a more sinister plot? The investigation was about to take a turn that no one saw coming, unraveling a decade-long affair that would shock the community to its core. The funeral of Randy Stone was a somber affair, filled with mournful faces and heavy hearts. But what made this funeral particularly chilling was the man who stood at the pulpit, delivering the eulogy, Pastor David Love, the same man who would later be revealed as the orchestrator of Randy's untimely death. As Pastor Love spoke, his words resonated with a haunting irony. We weep not just because of the separation of our loved one, but because of the questions that death brings. Questions like, why? Why him? Why now? He said. Little did the attendees know that the man posing these questions was the very reason they needed to be asked. The congregation listened intently, hanging on to every word, unaware of the dark secret that lurked behind the pastor's eloquent speech. Love's eulogy was a masterclass in deception, a performance so convincing that it left no room for doubt in the minds of those present. But hidden within the folds of his sermon were subtle inconsistencies, phrases that would later be scrutinized in the light of the shocking revelations that followed. The atmosphere was thick with grief, yet tinged with an undercurrent of unease. As Pastor Love concluded his eulogy, he looked out at the sea of faces before him, among them Teresa Stone, the grieving widow, and his secret lover. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, a silent exchange that spoke volumes. As the congregation filed out of the church, the questions posed by Pastor Love continued to echo in their minds. But the most unsettling question of all remained unspoken. Who really was the man behind the pulpit? And so, the funeral ended, but the story was far from over. The real drama was yet to unfold, as investigators began to peel back the layers of a crime so twisted, it defied comprehension. The initial shock of Randy Stone's death had barely settled when the police began their investigation. At the center of it was Teresa Stone, the grieving widow who had discovered her husband's lifeless body. Her distress call to the authorities had been filled with anguish, but as investigators delved deeper, they found unsettling discrepancies in her narrative. Teresa had claimed not to have touched Randy's body, yet she knew he had been shot. How could she have known this crucial detail without examining him? This glaring inconsistency raised eyebrows among the investigators. It was as if Teresa had rehearsed her alibi, providing an almost too perfect account of her actions leading up to the discovery of her husband's body. Then came the love letter, a piece of evidence that would turn the case on its head. Found discarded in the trash at their workplace, the letter was filled with intimate expressions and veiled promises. "Happy birthday, love. I am not in control of things yet, but when we are fully together, your birthday will always be exciting. It read. Who was this letter from, and more importantly, who was it for? When confronted with the love letter during questioning, Teresa feigned ignorance. But a surveillance camera captured her muttering to herself, "Oh great, I forgot about that." When left alone in the interrogation room, it was a slip-up, a crack in the carefully constructed facade she had put up. The investigation took an even darker turn when it was revealed that Teresa had been involved in a decade-long affair with none other than Pastor David Love, the man who had eulogized Randy. The same man who had stood at the pulpit asking, "Why him? Why now?" was now a prime suspect in the murder investigation. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the police were faced with a chilling realization. They were not just dealing with a random act of violence. This was a premeditated crime, intricately planned and ruthlessly executed. And at the heart of it all was a web of deceit so complex, it threatened to ensnare everyone involved. The community of Independence, Missouri, had been rocked to its core. The man they had mourned was betrayed by the people he had trusted the most. As the investigation continued, one question loomed large: how deep did this betrayal go, and what other secrets were yet to be uncovered? As investigators combed through the evidence, a seemingly innocuous piece of paper caught their attention. Tucked away in the trash bin of the insurance office where Randy and Teresa worked was a love letter. But this wasn't just any love letter, it was a Pandora's box that would blow the case wide open. The letter was filled with intimate expressions and promises for the future. One line stood out: "Happy birthday, love. I am not in control of things yet, but when we are fully together, your birthday will always be exciting." The words were laced with a sense of urgency and a hint of something darker. Who could have penned such a letter, and what did it mean? When confronted with the letter, Teresa feigned ignorance. She claimed she knew nothing about it. But a surveillance camera caught her muttering to herself, "Oh great, I forgot about that," when she thought she was alone. This slip of the tongue was more than just a forgetful moment. It was a crack in her facade. The love letter was a turning point in the investigation. It led the police to dig deeper into Teresa's personal life, and what they found was shocking. Teresa had been engaged in a decade-long affair with none other than Pastor David Love, the very man who had eulogized Randy at his funeral. The affair wasn't just a fling, it was a calculated relationship that had lasted for years. The love letter was a testament to their emotional and perhaps even criminal involvement. It raised questions about the extent to which Teresa and Pastor Love were willing to go to be fully together. As the community reeled from the revelations, the love letter became a symbol of betrayal, not just between a husband and wife but also between a pastor and his congregation. It was a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are those hidden in plain sight. The question now was, could this love letter be the key to solving Randy Stone's murder? And what other secrets were lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered? Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the cracks in Teresa's story and the investigation that followed. The love letter was just the tip of the iceberg. And as we'll see, the waters run much deeper and darker than anyone could have imagined. The interrogation room was cold, sterile, and filled with an air of tension that could cut through steel. Teresa Stone sat across from the investigators, her face a mask of composure. But the detectives weren't fooled. They had seen this kind of rehearsed calmness before. "Where were you on the night of the murder?" one of the detectives asked, his eyes piercing through Teresa's facade. "I've already told you," Teresa responded, her voice steady but tinged with a hint of irritation. "I was at home, alone." Her alibi was detailed, almost too detailed. She recounted her actions down to the minute, as if she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. But the detectives were seasoned professionals. They knew when something didn't add up. "Interesting," said the other detective, flipping through the notes. "You seem to have an answer for everything." It was then that they confronted her with the love letter found in the office trash. A letter filled with intimate details and promises of a future together. Teresa's eyes flickered for just a second, but it was enough. "I don't know anything about that letter," she claimed, feigning ignorance. Yet, a hidden camera in the interrogation room captured her muttering to herself, "Oh great, I forgot about that," when she thought she was alone. It was a slip, a crack in the carefully constructed alibi, and it was all the investigators needed. The room's atmosphere shifted. The detectives sensed they were close to breaking her. Teresa had been meticulous in crafting her story, but even the most rehearsed alibis have their flaws. And in that room, under the scrutiny of seasoned investigators, the truth was inching its way to the surface. "Is there something you'd like to share, Teresa?" One of the detectives leaned in, his voice low and menacing. The tension was palpable, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. What was Teresa hiding? And how deep did this rabbit hole go? As the investigators put, the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder with each passing second, amplifying the tension in the room. Teresa's eyes darted to the two-way mirror, perhaps contemplating who else might be watching this unfold. The detectives caught her glance and exchanged a knowing look. "Let's talk about the inconsistencies in your story," the first detective said, laying out crime scene photos on the table. You claimed not to have touched the body, yet you knew Randy was shot. How is that? Teresa hesitated, her eyes narrowing. I assumed he was shot because of the blood and the position he was in. Assumed or knew? The second detective interjected, not willing to let her off the hook. Before Teresa could answer, the door opened and another investigator walked in, holding a bagged piece of evidence. He whispered something to the first detective, who nodded and signaled for him to leave. We've just received the preliminary forensic report, the detective announced, turning his attention back to Teresa. And things aren't looking good for you. Teresa's face flushed, her rehearsed composure slipping. She clenched her fists, visibly struggling to maintain control. Is there something you'd like to revise in your statement? The detective pressed, sensing her vulnerability. Teresa looked down, her eyes clouded with emotion. For a moment, it seemed as if she would break, as if the weight of her secrets had finally become too much to bear. But then she looked up, her eyes meeting those of the investigators. You'll have to speak to my lawyer, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a standoff, a momentary pause in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Teresa had retreated behind her legal shield, but the detectives knew this was far from over. They had rattled her. It was only a matter of time before her carefully constructed world would come crashing down. As Teresa was escorted out of the interrogation room, the detectives couldn't help but wonder, what was she hiding? And how many more secrets were buried in the depths of this twisted tale? The community of Independence, Missouri, was already reeling from the loss of Randy Stone, a man many considered a pillar of society. But what came next would shake the very foundations of their faith and trust. As investigators dug deeper into Teresa's alibi and inconsistencies, another name began to surface: Pastor David Love, the very man who had eulogized Randy at his funeral. Could it be? Detective Williams muttered, staring at the computer screen that displayed a side-by-side comparison of Pastor Love and the composite sketch from an old, unsolved case. The resemblance was uncanny. Let's bring him in, his partner, Detective Smith said, already reaching for his coat. When Pastor Love walked into the police station, he carried himself with the same calm demeanor he exhibited at the pulpit. His eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of nervousness. The detectives led him into the interrogation room, where the atmosphere was thick with tension. Pastor Love, do you recognize this? Detective Williams slid a bagged piece of evidence across the table, a love letter found in the trash at Randy and Teresa's workplace. Pastor Love's eyes widened, but he quickly regained his composure. I write many letters to my congregation. It's part of my job to provide emotional support. But this one was different, wasn't it? Detective Smith interjected, laying out phone records that showed frequent late-night calls between Pastor Love and Teresa. Caught off guard, Pastor Love hesitated. Well, Teresa was going through a difficult time. She needed guidance, or something more. Detective Williams leaned in, locking eyes with Pastor Love. Just then, the door swung open, and another officer walked in, holding a folder. He whispered something to Detective Smith, who nodded and signaled for him to leave. We've just received some new evidence, Detective Smith announced, opening the folder to reveal surveillance photo. These were taken outside a motel. You and Teresa are clearly visible. Pastor Love's face turned ashen. The room fell silent, the tension reaching a palpable crescendo. Is there something you'd like to tell us, Pastor Love? Detective Williams finally broke the silence. The man who had stood at the pulpit, preaching about morality and virtue, now sat there, exposed and cornered. The walls were closing in, and for the first time, Pastor Love looked defeated. All right, he sighed, let's talk. As the words left his mouth, the detectives knew they had cracked the facade. A man of God implicated in a crime most unholy. It was a twist no one saw coming, adding another dark layer to an already complex investigation. The courtroom was a cauldron of tension, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone waited with bated breath as the judge prepared to deliver the sentences. Teresa Stone and Pastor David Love, the two individuals at the heart of this twisted tale, had both taken plea deals. But what did that mean for their futures? Teresa Stone, the widow and a key player in this sordid affair, had struck a plea deal that led to her being sentenced to 8 years in prison. It was a sentence that left many in the community shocked. 8 years for being complicit in the murder of her husband. It raised questions about the justice system and whether it had adequately served the memory of Randy Stone. As for Pastor David Love, the man who had stood at the pulpit during Randy Stone's funeral, his fate was even more severe. In November 2011, Love took a plea deal for second-degree murder. He is currently serving a life sentence. The man who had once guided his congregation through the teachings of the Bible would now have to navigate the rest of his life behind bars. The legal outcomes of this case were a topic of much debate. Some felt that justice had been served, especially with Pastor Love's life sentence. Others questioned whether Teresa had gotten off too lightly, given her role in the crime. But one thing was certain: the plea deals had brought a semblance of closure to a case that had rattled the community to its core. The courtroom emptied, but the questions lingered. Had justice truly been served? Or were there deeper issues at play, issues that a court of law could not fully address? As people filed out, the haunting words of Pastor Love's eulogy echoed in their minds. Why? Why him? Why now? And so, the chapter closed on the legal proceedings, but the story was far from over. The repercussions of these sentences would continue to ripple through the community, affecting lives and challenging beliefs about love, betrayal, and justice. The community of Independence, Missouri, was left in a state of shock and disbelief following the revelations about Randy Stone's murder. Randy was not just another resident. He was a pillar of the community, a former Marine who had served his country and was now serving his community through his insurance business. When the news broke that his wife, Teresa, and Pastor David Love were implicated in his murder, the community was thrown into turmoil. The church community, in particular, felt a sense of betrayal that was almost palpable. Pastor David Love was not just a spiritual leader. He was a man who had been entrusted with the moral and spiritual guidance of his congregation. To think that he could be involved in such a heinous act was beyond comprehension for many. Accusations of cover-ups within the church community began to circulate, adding another layer of complexity and betrayal to an already convoluted case. Local news outlets were flooded with stories, interviews, and op-eds about the case. Social media became a hotbed of speculation and debate. Some people expressed their sympathy for Teresa, believing that she must have been manipulated by love. Others were less forgiving, questioning how she could betray her husband and community in such a cold-blooded manner. The impact on the community was not just emotional but also practical. Trust in local institutions, particularly the church, was severely damaged. Many began to question their own judgment, wondering how they could have been so deceived by individuals they had held in high regard. The case served as a grim reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that evil can lurk where it is least expected. As the legal proceedings unfolded and both Teresa and Love were sentenced, a sense of closure still eluded the community. The questions of why and how could this happen remained, leaving a lingering sense of unease. While justice may have been served in the eyes of the law, the emotional and psychological scars left on the community are far from healed. In the end, the murder of Randy Stone did not just claim one life, it shattered the trust and unity of an entire community, leaving behind a legacy of betrayal, questions, and a haunting sense of what could have been. The case of Randy Stone's murder is not just a story of betrayal and deceit, it's a complex psychological puzzle that has left experts scratching their head. What could drive Teresa Stone and Pastor David Love, two individuals who were deeply embedded in their community and had so much to lose, to commit such a heinous act? Teresa Stone presents a perplexing psychological profile. On the surface, she appeared to be a devoted wife and a loving mother. However, beneath this facade, there was a woman capable of not just having an affair, but also plotting the murder of her husband. Some psychologists suggest that Teresa may have exhibited traits consistent with narcissistic personality disorder 1. Individuals with NPD often lack empathy and are willing to manipulate others to achieve their own goals. Could it be that Teresa's affair and subsequent involvement in her husband's murder were driven by a narcissistic need for validation and control? Pastor David Love's involvement is even more baffling. As a spiritual leader, he was in a position of power and trust. His role in the murder contradicts everything he preached from the pulpit. Psychological analyses suggest that Love might have been driven by a God complex, a psychological state where an individual believes they are infallible and can manipulate events according to their will too. This could explain his audacity to commit murder and then eulogize his victim. The relationship between Teresa and Love adds another layer of complexity. It's possible that they found in each other a kind of dark validation for their actions. The affair could have started as a physical attraction but escalated into a codependent relationship fueled by shared secrets and a mutual disregard for the sanctity of life. Both Teresa and Love had to reconcile their actions with their public personas. Cognitive dissonance theory suggests that when individuals hold two contradictory beliefs, they experience discomfort and will try to adjust one of the beliefs to reduce the dissonance. 3. In this case, both individuals might have rationalized their actions through a distorted sense of love or destiny, allowing them to commit the act without feeling the full weight of its moral implication. In the end, while we may never fully understand what drove Teresa Stone and Pastor David Love to plot and execute this unthinkable crime, the psychological underpinnings offer a glimpse into the complexities of human behavior and the dark potential that exists within us all. As the camera zooms out, capturing the solemn faces of those who sat in the courtroom, we're left grappling with a disquieting reality. Yes, justice has been meted out. Teresa Stone will spend 8 years contemplating her actions within the confines of a prison cell, while Pastor David Love faces the grim prospect of life imprisonment. 1. But as the credits begin to roll on this unsettling narrative, we find ourselves haunted by a series of lingering questions. Who really was Teresa Stone behind that facade of a loving wife? How could Pastor David Love, a spiritual guide to many, descend into such a dark abyss? The court has passed its judgment, but it has not, and perhaps cannot, unveil the full scope of human complexity that led to this tragedy. The family of Randy Stone is left to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. His children face a future marred by betrayal, and his parents are burdened with a loss that defies comprehension. The emotional toll is a life sentence in its own right, one with no possibility of parole. Independence, Missouri is a town forever changed. The betrayal has not only shattered families, but also eroded the community's faith in religious and social institutions. The path to healing is long and fraught with obstacles too. As we've seen, the media's sensational coverage has added another layer of complexity to this case. While it has informed the public, it has also, perhaps, exploited the tragedy for headlines, leaving the community with little space to grieve and come to terms with the events. So, as we conclude this video, let's take a moment to reflect on the unsettling reality that sometimes, even when justice is served, it doesn't offer the closure we so desperately seek. The story of Randy Stone, Teresa Stone, and Pastor David Love is a grim testament to the unfathomable complexities of human emotions and actions. And with that, we come to the end of this harrowing journey. If this story has taught us anything, it's that the human psyche is a labyrinth of complexities that we may never fully understand. Thank you for joining us, and if you found this story as compelling and thought-provoking as we did, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the enigmas of true crime.